Imagine waking up one day to discover that everything you thought you knew about your family, your marriage, and even yourself was a lie. Sounds like the plot of a movie, right? Well, it's not. This was my life. I thought I had the perfect husband, the perfect family, until a devastating secret came crashing down and shattered it all. The man I loved, the man I trusted with my whole heart, wasn't just my husband. He was also my younger brother's father. Let that sink in for a second. The very foundation of my life, every memory, every relationship, was built on lies. And the worst part, it wasn't just him. My own mother was in on it. Together they hid a truth so shocking, so twisted, that it left me questioning everything. How do you move forward when your world is turned upside down? How do you rebuild trust when the people closest to you are the ones who broke it? In this video, I'm going to take you through every gut-wrenching detail of my story, from the moment I found out to the pain, the anger, and the ultimate steps I took to find closure. This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's a story about resilience, about uncovering the past, and about discovering the strength I never knew I had. If you've ever wondered what it takes to survive the unimaginable, stick around. And while you're here, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and hit that notification bell. I'd also love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and let me know if you've ever faced a family secret that changed your life. You know that feeling when you think everything in your life has finally fallen into place. That's exactly where I was. My husband, Derek, was my rock, my partner in every way. He had this way of making me feel like no matter how chaotic the world outside got, we'd always have each other. And then there was my younger brother, Sam. If you asked anyone who knew us, they'd tell you he was my world. I practically raised him after my mom started going through her own struggles. We had this bond that felt unbreakable, pure, uncomplicated, and full of love. Derek and Sam got along like a house on fire. They'd crack jokes at my expense, binge-watch terrible action movies, and somehow turn every Sunday dinner into an impromptu comedy show. Watching them laugh together made me feel like I'd hit the jackpot with my family. It was the kind of life you'd post about on Instagram with captions like #blessed or my happy place. But looking back, I can see how blind I was to the cracks forming beneath the surface. At the time, though, I was oblivious. It was the little moments that warmed my heart the most. The way Derek would help Sam with school projects, or how Sam looked up to him like the older brother he never had. I used to joke that Derek was more invested in Sam's basketball games than I was. I'd never felt luckier to have such a loving, close-knit family. Still, even in the best moments, there were tiny things I ignored. Like how Derek would get oddly quiet when I talked about my childhood, or how Sam sometimes seemed hesitant to share stories about my mom. I chalked it up to normal family dynamics. Every family has its quirks, right? Little did I know, those seemingly perfect memories would soon be tainted by a shocking discovery that would leave me questioning everything I thought I knew about my family, my husband, and myself. First, I didn't think much of it. Derek had always been a little reserved when it came to talking about his past, but that didn't bother me. I figured we all had things we preferred to keep private. Still, there were these moments that didn't quite add up. Like when I'd mention something about my mom, and Derek would suddenly change the subject or leave the room. I told myself it was probably nothing. After all, he wasn't exactly close to his own family, so maybe he just didn't know how to handle those conversations. But then there were the looks. Subtle, fleeting glances between Derek and Sam that I couldn't quite put my finger on. It wasn't obvious at first, but once I noticed it, I couldn't unsee it. Sometimes they'd share these quiet, almost secretive moments, like they had their own little world I wasn't a part of. It was the kind of thing you wouldn't think twice about unless you were looking for it, but once you started paying attention, it felt impossible to ignore. The first real crack in the picture came during Sam's birthday dinner. Derek had planned the whole thing. A surprise party with all of Sam's favorite foods. It was sweet, thoughtful even, but as I watched Derek fuss over every detail, I couldn't help but wonder, why did he care so much? I mean, I was Sam's sister, And even I didn't put that much effort into his birthdays. When I teased Derek about going overboard, he just smiled and said, "Sam's special. He deserves it." At the time I thought it was adorable. Now I see it differently. Then there was the comment, so offhand that I almost missed it. We were sitting around after dinner, going through old photo albums. Sam had just made a joke about how much he looked like our mom when Derek muttered, "More than you know." It was quiet, almost under his breath, but I heard it. When I asked what he meant, he shrugged and said it was just a joke. But the way his face tightened, the way his eyes darted away, it didn't feel like a joke. I remember lying awake that night, replaying that moment in my head. What did he mean by that? Why did he say it? Was I just overthinking? These questions kept circling in my mind, and for the first time, I felt a knot of unease in what had always felt like a perfect life. Something wasn't right, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing more things. Derek had always been attentive to Sam, but now it felt different. He'd ask Sam questions about his life, his future, even his health. Questions that seemed more like a concerned parent than a brother-in-law. Once, I walked in on them having what looked like a serious conversation, and they both stopped talking the moment they saw me. I laughed it off, joking that they were conspiring against me, but deep down, I felt a pang of something I couldn't name. The tension wasn't just between them. It was in me. I found myself watching their interactions more closely, searching for something, anything, that would explain the strange feeling gnawing at my gut. It was like trying to solve a puzzle when you weren't even sure what the picture was supposed to look like. Then one day, I found Derek's phone lying on the counter. He'd left it unlocked, and before I even realized what I was doing, I picked it up. I wasn't looking for anything specific, but what I found stopped me cold. There was a text from my mom. It wasn't incriminating on its own, just a simple "thank you for everything as always." But something about it felt off. Why was Derek texting my mom? And why didn't I know about it? That was the moment I knew I couldn't ignore my suspicions any longer. Something was happening, something big, and it was only a matter of time before the truth came out. But little did I know, uncovering the past would lead to a revelation far more shocking than anything I could have imagined. Curiosity can be a dangerous thing. Once the seed of doubt was planted, I couldn't stop myself from digging. At first, it felt harmless, like trying to solve a riddle. But the more I uncovered, the more unsettling the pieces became. It started small. Old family photos, stories that didn't quite align, and those guarded looks Derek would give whenever I brought up my mom. It wasn't just paranoia, it was something deeper, something real. One night, while Derek was out, I decided to go through an old box of keepsakes my mom had left at my place years ago. It was mostly harmless stuff, baby pictures, birthday cards, random trinkets, but there was one envelope that caught my eye. It was labeled hospital records. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside, there were documents about Sam's birth. Nothing unusual, except for one glaring omission. The father's name was left blank. I thought it was strange, but I reasoned that maybe it was just an oversight. Still, it planted another question in my mind. Why hadn't my mom ever mentioned this? The next day, I casually asked my mom about Sam's dad. She froze for a moment, just long enough for me to notice, before brushing it off with a vague, "He wasn't in the picture." Her tone was dismissive, almost defensive, and it didn't sit right with me. My mom wasn't one to shy away from tough conversations, so why was she acting so cagey about this? That's when I decided to dig deeper into Derek's past. I started with the basics, searching through old social media posts, photos, anything I could find. First, everything seemed normal. Derek's life before we met was exactly as he'd described. College, a few serious relationships, and a stable career. But then I found something odd. A picture of Derek and my mom at a charity event. It wasn't the photo itself that was strange. It was the date. The picture was taken 2 years before Derek and I supposedly met. Why hadn't he ever mentioned knowing my mom before? I confronted Derek about the photo that night. His response was casual, almost too casual. "Oh yeah, your mom volunteered with that organization." I didn't think it was important. Maybe it wasn't, but his tone, calm, measured, and just a little too rehearsed, left me feeling like there was more to the story. My suspicions deepened when I found an old journal my mom used to keep. Flipping through the pages, I stumbled upon an entry written around the time Sam was born. It was cryptic, but one line jumped out at me. "I hope he never finds out the truth. It's better this way." My heart sank. Who was he? And what truth was my mom so desperate to hide? Feeling overwhelmed, I decided to confide in my best friend Lisa. She listened patiently as I laid out everything. The weird texts, the strange photo, the journal entry. Lisa, ever the pragmatist, suggested something I hadn't even considered. A DNA test. "If you really want answers," she said, "that's the quickest way to get them." The idea both terrified and intrigued me. What if the DNA test revealed something I didn't want to know? What if it confirmed my worst fears? But at that point I was too far down the rabbit hole to turn back. So, I ordered a kit, telling myself it was just to rule out the crazy thoughts swirling in my head. While waiting for the results, I couldn't stop replaying every interaction I'd ever witnessed between Derek, Sam, and my mom. The moments that had once seemed innocent now felt loaded with meaning. Like the time Derek had insisted on paying for Sam's summer camp, despite our tight budget. Or the way my mom always seemed overly protective of Derek, even when we argued. It was like they shared a bond that went beyond the usual in-law dynamic. When the results finally arrived, I hesitated for hours before opening the email. My hands shook as I clicked through the report, scanning the data until I found it. A 50% paternal match between Derek and Sam. I felt the room spin as the realization hit me. My husband wasn't just my husband. He was my younger brother's biological father. At that moment, everything I thought I knew about my family, my marriage, and myself shattered. The truth I'd been chasing was far more devastating than I could have ever imagined. But even as I sat there, overwhelmed by the weight of this discovery, one question loomed larger than the rest. What do I do now? The moment I discovered the truth felt like a punch to the gut. Sharp, disorienting, and leaving me gasping for air. Sitting there, staring at the DNA test results, it was like my brain couldn't fully process what I was reading. Paternal match. Derek wasn't just my husband. He was my younger brother Sam's father. The sheer weight of that realization hit me like a tidal wave, knocking down everything I thought I knew about my family, my marriage, and myself. I couldn't stay still. My mind raced with questions that had no immediate answers. How? When? Why? I paced the room, holding the report in one hand, as if staring at it longer would make it make sense. Flashes of memories. Moments that had once seemed so innocent, now felt stained with betrayal. Derek's closeness to Sam, the knowing glances, my mom's evasive answers. It was all connected, and yet, I still couldn't wrap my head around it. First, I didn't cry. I think I was too stunned. But then the emotions started flooding in all at once. Shock, disbelief, anger, heartbreak. I collapsed onto the floor, clutching the papers as if they were a lifeline. How could the man I loved, the man I trusted more than anyone, hide something like this from me? And my mom. How could she be complicit in something so twisted? The confrontation with Derek happened the same night. I couldn't sit with the knowledge for another second. I waited for him to come home. The DNA results spread out on the coffee table like damning evidence in a courtroom. When he walked in and saw my face, I think he knew something was wrong, but he had no idea what was coming. "Sit down," I said, my voice trembling. He hesitated, looking at me with confusion and concern. "What's going on?" he asked, his tone calm but wary. I didn't answer. Instead, I slid the papers across the table toward him. "Explain this," I demanded. I watched as his eyes scanned the document, his face paling with every passing second. When he looked up at me, there was no denial, no feigned confusion, just silence. That silence spoke louder than any words ever could. "How could you?" I finally burst out, my voice cracking under the weight of my emotions. "How could you marry me knowing this? Knowing what you did?" First he tried to deflect. "It's complicated," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. But I wasn't having it. "Complicated?" Snap. "You slept with my mother. You're Sam's father. And then you married me, Derek. Do you understand how sick that is?" His defenses started to crumble. He admitted to having a relationship with my mom years ago, long before he met me. He claimed it was a mistake, a fleeting connection during a difficult time in both their lives. According to him, he didn't even know Sam was his son until after we were married. But whether or not that was true didn't matter. The damage was done. My mom, however, was a different story. When I confronted her, I expected denial, maybe even indignation. But what I got was something far worse: resignation. She didn't even try to defend herself. Instead, she admitted everything in a calm, almost detached tone that made my skin crawl. "I thought I was protecting you," she said, as if that justified the years of lies. "You were happy with Derek. What good would it have done to tell you the truth?" Her words cut deeper than any knife. Protecting me. By letting me marry the father of my younger brother. How could she possibly think that was okay? The confrontation turned into a screaming match. I accused her of ruining my life, of being selfish, of putting her own needs above mine. She fired back, accusing me of being ungrateful, of not understanding how hard it was for her as a single mother. The argument ended with me storming out, slamming the door behind me, and vowing never to speak to her again. But the fallout didn't end there. My emotions spiraled out of control in the days that followed. Couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces: Derek's look of guilt, my mom's cold indifference, Sam's oblivious smile. He didn't know. He had no idea about the tangled web of lies that surrounded his existence. And how could I tell him? How do you break something like that to someone you love? The emotional shock turned into a physical weight that I carried everywhere I went. I avoided Derek as much as possible, but when we were in the same room, the tension was unbearable. He tried to apologize, to explain, but his words felt hollow. "I love you," he said one night, tears streaming down his face. "I didn't know how to tell you. I was scared of losing you." His words might have moved me once, but not anymore. "You already lost me," I replied, my voice cold and distant. The hardest part was pretending everything was normal around Sam. He had no idea what was going on, and I didn't have the heart to shatter his world just yet. Every time he smiled at me or hugged me, I felt a pang of guilt so deep it was almost unbearable. How could I look him in the eye, knowing what I knew? As the days turned into weeks, the weight of the hidden truth grew heavier. I was stuck in a web of family betrayal, torn between my love for Sam, my anger at Derek and my mom, and the gnawing question of what to do next. One thing was clear: this wasn't over. The worst was yet to come. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. The DNA results were horrifying enough, but something about Derek's confession, how he said he didn't know Sam was his son until after we were married, felt incomplete. His words were too measured, too rehearsed. It was like he had practiced how much of the truth to tell me, leaving out just enough to keep the full scope of his betrayal hidden. So I decided to keep digging, even though part of me wasn't sure I could handle what I might find. Late at night, after Derek went to bed, I would sit in the living room scrolling through old photos, emails, anything that might give me more context. One night, I found an old email chain between my mom and Derek from years before I even met him. The subject line was innocuous, something about a charity event, but the tone of their messages was anything but. They weren't just acquaintances. They were intimate. There were subtle hints, phrases like, "I can't stop thinking about that night, and we need to talk about what happened," that sent chills down my spine. I confronted Derek with the emails the next day. His face went pale, and for the first time I saw real fear in his eyes. "Why are you digging into this?" he asked, his voice defensive. "Isn't what you already know enough?" His reaction only confirmed what I suspected. There was more. "I'm digging because you're still lying to me," I snapped. "If you want me to believe anything you say, you need to tell me the whole truth. Now." What he said next changed everything. Derek admitted that he hadn't just learned about Sam's paternity after our marriage. He had known before we even started dating. My mom had told him, and they had made a pact to keep it a secret. "It was for your sake," he said, as if that justified everything. "We didn't want to hurt you." Hurt me. The audacity of those words made my blood boil. How could they possibly think that living a lie was better than facing the truth? But Derek wasn't done. He went on to reveal that my mom had been the one to push him to stay in my life. "She thought I could be a stabilizing presence for you," he explained. "She said you needed someone strong, someone who would take care of you." It was like being hit with a second wave of betrayal. My own mother had orchestrated this entire nightmare, manipulating both of us to serve her own twisted sense of what was best for me. And then came the most shocking part of all. Derek admitted that he had considered leaving me several times over the years but stayed because of Sam. "He's my son," he said, his voice breaking. "I couldn't walk away from him." Those words cut deeper than anything else. All this time, I had thought Derek's love for Sam was just a natural bond between a brother-in-law and his wife's sibling. But now I saw it for what it was. A father trying to stay close to his son, no matter the cost. I didn't know how to process any of it. The layers of betrayal, the lies, the manipulation, it was too much. My mother had used me, Derek had deceived me, and even Sam, though innocent in all of this, now felt like a painful reminder of everything I had lost. The family I thought I had was gone, replaced by a twisted web of secrets and lies. But there was still one question left unanswered: why? Why had my mom chosen Derek? Why had Derek gone along with it? And why had no one thought I deserved to know the truth? Desperate for answers, I confronted my mom again, demanding to know what had driven her to make such a devastating choice. Her response was cold and calculated. "Because I knew you wouldn't handle it," she said. "You were fragile back then. I did what I thought was best for everyone." Her words felt like a slap in the face. Fragile. Was that how she saw me? As someone too weak to handle the truth? It was like she didn't even recognize the damage she had done. Not just to me but to our entire family. I walked away from that conversation feeling more alone than ever, knowing that I could never trust her again. As the days went on, the emotional fallout only grew worse. Derek tried to act as if things could go back to normal, but every time I looked at him, all I could see was the man who had lied to me for years. My anger consumed me, but underneath it all was a deep, aching sadness. I had loved him with everything I had, and now I didn't even know who he was. One night, as I lay awake in bed, I found myself thinking about Sam. He was the only innocent party in all of this, and yet he was the one who would be most affected by the truth. Should I tell him? Could I tell him? The thought of shattering his world was almost too much to bear, but the idea of keeping him in the dark felt just as wrong. Either way, the weight of that decision was mine alone to carry. And then there was the lingering question of what to do with Derek. Could I forgive him? Could I stay with him, knowing what I now knew? Every time I thought I had an answer, another layer of the betrayal would surface, pulling me back into the depths of my anger and pain. It was like being trapped in a nightmare with no way out. Little did I know, the revelations weren't over yet. As I continued to piece together the fragments of my shattered life, I stumbled upon something that would take everything I thought I knew and turn it on its head once again. The days following the revelation felt like I was living in someone else's nightmare. I kept hoping I'd wake up, that the DNA results, the confessions, all of it, would turn out to be a cruel joke. But every morning, reality hit me all over again, like a weight pressing down on my chest. My marriage, my family, my very sense of self. Everything I thought was real had been obliterated in an instant. First, I tried to pretend I was okay. I kept my routine, went to work, smiled when people asked how I was. But inside I was crumbling. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, betrayal, confusion, guilt. I felt like I was drowning in questions I couldn't answer. How could Derek and my mom have done this to me? Was I so naive that I missed all the signs? And most painfully, what did this mean for my relationship with Sam? My emotions were all over the place. One moment I was furious, throwing things, screaming into pillows, pacing the house like a caged animal. The next, I was overcome with sadness, curled up on the bathroom floor, sobbing until I felt hollow. There were moments when I couldn't even bring myself to look in the mirror because I didn't recognize the person staring back at me. My identity felt fractured, like pieces of a puzzle that no longer fit together. The guilt was the hardest part to deal with. Guilt for not seeing the truth sooner, for allowing myself to fall for Derek, for not protecting Sam from this twisted web of lies. I kept replaying every decision I'd ever made, wondering where I went wrong, what I could have done differently. And yet, deep down, I knew this wasn't my fault. But knowing that didn't make the pain any easier to bear. I started having nightmares, vivid, gut-wrenching dreams where I'd confront Derek and my mom, only for them to laugh in my face. In one dream, Sam was the one who found out the truth, and his heartbroken expression haunted me long after I woke up. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. I'd lie awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with questions I couldn't silence. Derek, to his credit, tried to make amends. He gave me space when I needed it, tried to talk when I was ready, and constantly apologized for the pain he'd caused. But his words felt empty. Every time he said, "I love you," I wanted to scream. Then why did you lie to me? Love wasn't supposed to feel like this, like a betrayal wrapped in false promises. As for my mom, she acted as though nothing had happened. She called me every few days, asking about Sam or my work, completely ignoring the elephant in the room. Her nonchalance only fueled my anger. How could she be so calm when my world was falling apart? Did she even care about the damage she'd caused? Sam, blissfully unaware of the chaos around him, became my anchor in those early days. His smile, his laughter, the way he'd light up when he talked about his friends or school, it reminded me that not everything in my life was broken. But being around him also felt like walking a tightrope. I wanted to protect him from the truth, but I knew I couldn't keep it from him forever. The thought of breaking his heart was almost too much to bear. In a desperate attempt to make sense of everything, I started seeing a therapist. At first, I wasn't sure it would help. How could talking to a stranger possibly fix the mess my life had become? But over time, those sessions became a lifeline. My therapist helped me unpack the layers of betrayal, the guilt, the anger. She reminded me that my feelings were valid, that it was okay to grieve the life I thought I had. She also encouraged me to set boundaries with Derek and my mom, to take control of the situation instead of letting it control me. It wasn't easy. Every conversation with them felt like walking through a minefield, but I slowly started to reclaim my voice. When my mom called to ask why I wasn't visiting as often, I told her, flat out, that I needed space. When Derek tried to talk about moving forward, I told him I wasn't ready to even think about forgiveness. One of the hardest parts was deciding who else to tell. Did my friends need to know? My extended family? Would they judge me? Pity me? In the end, I confided in a small circle of close friends. Their support was overwhelming, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't alone. Lisa, my best friend, even came over with wine and a stack of old rom-coms, insisting that we take a break from the drama for one night. Didn't fix everything, but it helped. Slowly, I started to rebuild a sense of normalcy, though it was a far cry from the life I once had. I began journaling, pouring my thoughts onto the page in an effort to make sense of them. I threw myself into work, finding solace in the structure and routine. And when I wasn't working, I spent as much time as I could with Sam, cherishing the innocence he still had. But even as I tried to move forward, the weight of the truth lingered. Every interaction with Derek felt like a test of my resolve. Every phone call from my mom brought a fresh wave of anger, and every smile from Sam reminded me of the secret I was still keeping from him. The fallout from that devastating revelation was far from over, and I knew the hardest decisions were still ahead of me. The confrontation felt inevitable, like a storm that had been building for weeks. The weight of their betrayal was too heavy, too suffocating to carry any longer. I had spent so much time replaying their actions in my mind, Derek's lies, my mom's manipulation, that I knew I couldn't move forward without facing them directly. It wasn't just about demanding answers. It was about reclaiming my voice, my dignity, and my sense of control. I started with Derek. I chose a quiet evening when Sam wasn't around, the house eerily silent except for the ticking of the clock. Derek sat across from me on the couch, his posture tense, as if he knew what was coming. I laid the DNA results on the table between us, a tangible reminder of the truth he had tried to hide. "We need to talk," I began, my voice steady but cold. "And this time I want everything. No half-truths, no excuses. Just the full story." Derek took a deep breath, his hands trembling as he reached for the papers. "I've told you everything I can," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. But I wasn't buying it. "No, you haven't," I snapped. "You've told me what's convenient for you, what you think I can handle. But I deserve the truth, Derek. All of it." And so, slowly, painstakingly, he began to unravel the rest of the story. He admitted that his relationship with my mom had lasted longer than he initially claimed, almost 2 years, on and off. He described it as complicated, a word that felt like a slap in the face. According to him, they had ended things amicably, but when my mom discovered she was pregnant, she chose not to tell him. "She thought it was better that way," Derek explained, his voice thick with guilt. "She wanted to protect Sam from me. I couldn't hold back my anger. Protect him by letting his father marry his sister." The words came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't care. Derek flinched, but I pressed on. "Do you even hear how insane that sounds? How could either of you think this was okay?" Derek didn't have an answer, and his silence spoke volumes. For the first time, I saw him not as my husband but as a deeply flawed, selfish man who had prioritized his own comfort over the truth. Confronting my mom was even harder. I went to her house the next day, my heart pounding as I stood on her doorstep. When she opened the door, her face lit up with a smile that quickly faded when she saw the look on my face. "We need to talk," I said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. She didn't try to deny it this time. Instead, she sat across from me at the kitchen table, her hands clasped tightly together, her gaze fixed on the floor. "I know you're angry," she began, but I cut her off. "Angry doesn't even begin to cover it," I said, my voice shaking. "You lied to me, Mom. You lied to all of us. You let me marry Derek, knowing he was Sam's father. How could you do that to me? To Sam?" Her response was calm, almost rehearsed. "I did what I thought was best," she said, her tone maddeningly steady. "You were happy. Derek made you happy. I didn't want to ruin that." "Ruin it?" I echoed, my voice rising. You didn't just ruin my happiness. You destroyed my trust, my marriage, my family. How could you possibly think this was the right thing to do? For a moment, she looked like she might cry, but then her expression hardened. You don't understand, she said. I was trying to protect you. Protect all of us. Protect us from what? I demanded. The truth. Because let me tell you, Mom, the truth is a hell of a lot better than living a lie. The argument escalated from there, voices rising, emotions boiling over. I accused her of being selfish, of manipulating me and Derek for her own benefit. She accused me of being ungrateful, of not appreciating the sacrifices she had made. By the time I stormed out of her house, slamming the door behind me, I felt more broken than ever. But the hardest confrontation of all was with Sam. For weeks, I had debated whether to tell him the truth. Part of me wanted to shield him from the pain, to preserve his innocence for just a little longer. But I knew that wasn't fair. He deserved to know the truth, even if it hurt. I sat him down one evening, my hands shaking as I tried to find the right words. Sam, I began, my voice cracking. There's something I need to tell you. Something important. He looked at me with wide, trusting eyes, completely unaware of the bombshell I was about to drop. What is it? He asked, his tone light and curious. I took a deep breath, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. It's about Derek, I said. And Mom. And too. The words came tumbling out, each one heavier than the last. I explained everything. The DNA test, Derek's confession, the truth about his father. Sam's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to heartbreak. Are you serious? He whispered, his voice barely audible. I wish I wasn't, I said, tears streaming down my face. I'm so sorry, Sam. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. The room fell silent as he processed the revelation. His face pale, his eyes brimming with tears. So, Derek. He's not just your husband, he asked, his voice trembling. No, I said, my heart breaking all over again. He's your father. The look on his face will haunt me forever. It was a mixture of pain, anger, and betrayal that I wouldn't wish on anyone. He didn't say anything else, just stood up and walked out of the room, leaving me sitting there, shattered and alone. The fallout from those confrontations was devastating, but it wasn't the end. If anything, it was just the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with uncertainty, pain, and the slow, arduous process of picking up the pieces. Rebuilding trust after such an overwhelming betrayal felt impossible at first. My life had become a puzzle with too many missing pieces, and I didn't even know where to start. The foundation of my marriage, my relationship with my mother, even my sense of family, all of it had been destroyed. But despite the pain, I knew I couldn't stay stuck in the wreckage forever. I had to move forward, even if I wasn't sure what that would look like. The first step was accepting that I couldn't fix everything at once. My emotions were raw, and my thoughts were tangled with anger, sadness, and confusion. I leaned heavily on therapy during this time, attending weekly sessions where I could unpack the layers of betrayal and start to process what had happened. My therapist helped me see that healing wouldn't be linear, that there would be setbacks, moments when the pain felt just as fresh as the day I found out. But she also reminded me that progress, no matter how small, was still progress. One of the hardest things to confront was my relationship with Derek. Part of me wanted to cut ties completely, to erase him from my life like a bad chapter in a book. But it wasn't that simple. Derek wasn't just my husband. He was also Sam's father. And as much as I hated what he had done, I couldn't ignore the fact that he was a part of Sam's life. So, I made a decision. I told Derek that while I wasn't ready to forgive him, I was willing to try coexisting for Sam's sake. It was a delicate balance, one that required setting clear boundaries and constantly reevaluating what I could handle. Derek, to his credit, seemed genuinely remorseful. He gave me the space I needed, focusing his energy on being a good father to Sam. At times, I saw glimpses of the man I had fallen in love with, the man who had made me laugh, who had been my partner in everything. But those glimpses were fleeting, overshadowed by the weight of his lies. Forgiveness, if it ever came, would take time. And for now, I wasn't ready to give him that. My relationship with my mom was even more complicated. Unlike Derek, she didn't seem to fully grasp the gravity of her actions. She apologized, yes, but her apologies felt hollow, as though she was more upset about the fallout than about the betrayal itself. Every conversation with her felt like walking a tightrope. One wrong word, and the fragile truce we had could shatter. Over time, I realized that rebuilding our relationship might not be possible, at least not in the way it had been before. For my own sanity, I had to distance myself, limiting our interactions to the bare minimum. Sam, on the other hand, became my priority. Telling him the truth had been the hardest thing I'd ever done, but it was also the most necessary. He deserved honesty even if it hurt. In the weeks that followed, I focused on being there for him, giving him the space to process the revelation in his own way. Some days he was quiet and withdrawn, lost in his thoughts. Other days he was angry, lashing out at me, at Derek, at the unfairness of it all. But through it all, I reminded him that I was there, that I loved him, and that we would get through this together. To help Sam cope, I encouraged him to see a therapist as well. At first, he resisted, insisting that he didn't need to talk to anyone. But eventually he agreed, and over time I could see the difference it made. He started opening up more, sharing his feelings and asking questions about our family's history. Those conversations weren't easy, but they were necessary. Each one felt like a small step toward healing, a chance to rebuild the trust that had been broken. For myself, I found solace in journaling. Every night, I would pour my thoughts onto the page, writing about the day's struggles and small victories. It became a way to track my progress, to remind myself that even in the darkest moments, I was still moving forward. I also leaned on my friends, particularly Lisa, who had been my rock through all of this. She reminded me that it was okay to laugh, to find moments of joy amidst the chaos. Together we created new memories, ones that weren't tainted by betrayal or lies. Over time, I began to rediscover who I was outside of my marriage, outside of the tangled mess my family had become. I started taking classes, photography, yoga, anything that sparked my interest. I volunteered at a local shelter, finding purpose in helping others. Slowly but surely, I started to reclaim my identity, piecing together a version of myself that felt whole again. But healing wasn't just about rebuilding my life. It was also about finding closure. I knew that meant having one final conversation with Derek and my mom, a chance to say everything I needed to say, to let go of the anger that had been consuming me. When the time came, I sat them down separately, speaking from the heart. I told Derek that while I appreciated his efforts to make amends, our relationship would never be the same. And I told my mom that while I loved her, I needed to protect myself from her manipulations. Those conversations were painful, but they were also freeing. For the first time, I felt like I was in control of my own story, rather than a victim of someone else's choices. And while the scars of their betrayal would always be there, they no longer defined me. I had found a way to move forward, not perfectly, not painlessly, but in a way that felt true to who I was. Even as I began to find peace, I knew the journey wasn't over. The ripple effects of those revelations would continue to shape my life, my relationships, and my sense of self. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was on solid ground, ready to face whatever came next. It's strange how the most devastating moments of our lives can teach us the most profound lessons. Looking back on everything that happened, the lies, the betrayal, the shattered trust, I can see now that, as painful as it was, this experience shaped me in ways I never could have imagined. It forced me to reevaluate not just my relationships, but also my sense of self, my boundaries, and what I truly value in life. One of the biggest lessons I learned was the importance of trusting my instincts. For years, I ignored the subtle red flags, brushing them off as paranoia or overthinking. I convinced myself that my family was unshakable, that the people I loved would never hurt me. But the truth is, ignoring those gut feelings only prolonged my pain. Now I know better. I've learned to listen to that inner voice, to pay attention when something feels off, and to trust myself enough to seek the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. I also learned the power of resilience. There were moments when the weight of it all felt unbearable, when I wanted to give up and let the pain consume me. But each time I found a way to keep going, whether it was through therapy, leaning on friends, or simply taking things one day at a time. Resilience isn't about pretending everything is okay. It's about finding the strength to keep moving forward, even when everything feels broken. This experience also taught me the value of boundaries. For so long, I prioritized other people's happiness over my own. I stayed silent to keep the peace, tolerated behaviors that I knew weren't okay, and put my needs on the back burner. But this ordeal forced me to put myself first, to set boundaries with my mom, with Derek, even with myself. It was hard, yes, but it was also liberating. For the first time, I felt like I was taking control of my own life. Another lesson was the importance of forgiveness, not for them but for myself. For a long time, I carried this sense of guilt, blaming myself for not seeing the truth sooner, for letting it happen. But through therapy and self-reflection, I realized that the blame didn't lie with me. I was lied to, manipulated, betrayed. Forgiving myself was the first step in letting go of the anger and shame that had been weighing me down. And perhaps the most surprising lesson of all was the discovery of my own strength. I always thought of myself as fragile, someone who needed protecting. But this experience showed me just how strong I am. I survived something that could have broken me, and I came out the other side with a clearer sense of who I am and what I want. I'm not the same person I was before, and that's okay. In fact, it's something I'm proud of. But beyond my personal growth, this experience gave me a deeper understanding of family and relationships. It taught me that love isn't always enough, that trust, honesty, and respect are just as important. It taught me that sometimes the people who hurt us the most are the ones we love the most, and that healing doesn't always mean reconciliation. And it taught me that family isn't defined by blood or titles. It's defined by the people who show up for you, who love you unconditionally, and who make you feel safe. If there's one thing I hope others take away from my story, it's that pain doesn't have to define you. Yes, it's messy and ugly and incredibly hard. But it's also a chance to grow, to learn, to become stronger. It's a chance to find out who you really are and what you're capable of. And as much as it hurts, it's also a reminder that you can survive anything, even the unimaginable. As I sit here reflecting on everything, I feel a strange sense of peace. Not because it's over. Healing is an ongoing process, but because I know I'm on the right path. I've turned my pain into strength, my heartbreak into resilience, and my confusion into clarity. And for that I'm grateful. As I reflect on everything that's happened, it's clear that my life will never be the same, and honestly I wouldn't want it to be. The person I was before all this, the one who trusted so blindly, who ignored her own instincts, and who let others dictate her sense of reality, is gone. In her place is someone stronger, wiser, and more in tune with her own worth. This journey, as painful as it's been, has reshaped not just my relationships but also my entire understanding of love, family, and trust. Family secrets have a way of changing everything, don't they? They unravel the stories we've been told, force us to confront truths we'd rather avoid, and push us to redefine who we are. And yet, as much as they break us, they also give us the opportunity to rebuild. For me, that rebuilding has been about choosing myself, choosing honesty, self-respect, and the kind of relationships that add value to my life instead of draining it. The revelation that my husband is my younger brother's father was the kind of shocking discovery that most people only read about in tabloids or hear about in passing. Living it, that's a whole other story. It shattered everything I thought I knew about my family and myself. But it also showed me the importance of uncovering the past, of facing the truth head-on, no matter how painful it might be. Because only by confronting the hidden truth can we truly move forward. There are days when the emotional fallout still feels fresh, when I think about what could have been if only things had been different. But then I remind myself of the life-changing discoveries I've made, the strength I've found in unraveling family history, and the power of finally confronting the truth. Those lessons are worth every tear, every sleepless night, and every difficult conversation. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that family is complicated. It's messy and imperfect and sometimes downright painful. But it's also where we find some of our greatest joys and deepest connections. And while my family may never look the way it once did, I'm learning to embrace the new version of it, one built on transparency, understanding, and a commitment to doing better. So, to anyone listening who's facing their own shocking family news or unraveling hidden truths, I want to say this: you're stronger than you think. The pain is real and it's hard, but it's also temporary. What you build from it, the person you become because of it, is entirely up to you. Trust yourself, lean on the people who love you, and don't be afraid to start over. Because sometimes, starting over is the only way to truly move forward. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever faced something similar, or even if this just made you think about your own family dynamics, I'd love to hear from you. Let's keep this conversation going. And if you found value in this video, please hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so we can keep exploring these difficult but important topics together. You're not alone, and neither am I. So, what do you do when everything you thought you knew crumbles? How do you find strength in the midst of heartbreak, betrayal, and chaos? My story taught me that pain doesn't define you. What you choose to do with it does. I learned that facing the truth, no matter how devastating, is the first step toward healing. And through that process, I discovered a version of myself that's stronger, wiser, and more resilient than I ever thought possible. Now, I want to leave you with a challenge. Take a moment to think about the relationships in your life. Are there truths you're avoiding? Conversations you've been putting off? Maybe you've uncovered something that's left you reeling, and you're not sure how to move forward. My advice: don't run from it. Confront it head-on, because clarity, though painful at first, is the key to growth. And now, I'd love to hear from you. What would you do if you were in my shoes? Have you ever uncovered a secret that changed the way you see someone you love? Let me know in the comments below. I'm here to keep this conversation going. Before you go, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into stories that matter. Your support means everything to me, and together we can create a space where honesty and healing take center stage. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you in the next video.